Hi, Andrew from SACS. Today we're going to be talking about emotionality and emotional intelligence. We get asked this question all the time from people who are users of our psych tests. What is emotionality and what is emotional intelligence and how do they compare? Well, in fact, they are related in a way, but they're very different things. This video is going to explain the difference. So let's start off with emotional intelligence. The current definition of emotional intelligence is the three things that you see on the screen right now. A person who is held to be emotionally intelligent should be able to recognize the emotions of other people, and themselves for that matter, should be able to self-regulate their emotions and take an optimistic attitude, so kind of a resilience characteristic. Now, the important thing to understand is those two are unalloyed goods, aren't they? I mean, you can't say an environment where that would be a bad thing, for instance, to be able to recognize the emotions of other people or to be able to self-regulate your emotions. But the third is not an unalloyed good, which is to say there are times when it would be good and times when it would be bad, and that is the degree to which we use emotions to make decisions. Now, imagine they're all lying on a gurney and you're just about to be wheeled into an operating theatre. I'll bet you're hoping that that surgeon makes decisions in a way that has nothing to do with emotions. The decision should be made completely cognitively, and that's what the research shows us. Now, if you look at what makes up these three different forms of emotional intelligence, you'll see that there are personality components that contribute to all three. And in two of the cases, the personality components are largely positive things that we know help in life generally. And in the case of the third, this question of using emotions to make decisions, it's not all positive contributors. So let's look at the data. Firstly, let's define what we mean by personality. For the purposes of this, we're using the Lee and Ashton model of personality, the thing called the Hexaco model of personality: honesty, humility, extroversion, emotionality, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. Now, emotionality, you'll see, has four components here: fearfulness, anxiety, dependence, and sentimentality. So emotionality is a kind of a vulnerability thing. It's the degree to which we find the outside world to be confronting to us. Now, this has been a characteristic of most models of personality. Prior to the Hexaco model of personality, there was a thing called the five-factor model of personality, otherwise known to its friends by the Big Five. And the five-factor model of personality had a model which was called emotionality, sometimes called neuroticism, and it was all about being emotionally unstable, and that's pretty much what the Hexaco version is as well. But in any event, we know that when people are high in this, they tend to run into more difficulties in life. They tend to be more stressed, you tend to get higher levels of staff turnover. People who work with people who are highly emotional tend to find them more stressful colleagues, and it's kind of challenging to be like that. So if you're lucky enough to be born without high levels of emotionality, chances are you're going to go to hospital less or need therapy of various psychological kinds less. It's a bad thing to be highly emotional. Another contributor to the way people are at an individual level is values. And this is the Schwartz model of values, which says that there are 10 individual values. And you see that they are in four general quadrants: conservation, self-enhancement, self-transcendence, and openness to change. And you see the values are things like security, power, achievement, etc. So the difference between values and personality is that values are largely learned in the course of life, whereas personality is very heavily genetically determined. You know, the most conservative would say 50% genetically determined. The most bullish, and I'm one of those, would probably be getting closer to 80%. Whereas we do know that values are not determined so much by personality. In fact, Jeremy Anglin from Deakin University and myself had a publication in a peer-reviewed journal not long ago on exactly that topic, where we demonstrated that values are largely acquired through means other than personality. And it's held to be acquired by what we call significant others, people who influence us. Now, the point of all of that is that values can change over the course of life, and they don't have such a big impact on us as our personality does, because genes tend to be assertive, but they can influence what we do. Now, personality, therefore, is kind of like hardwiring. What does our DNA tell us to do? Values are actually a kind of goal. So, for instance, if you see here benevolence, what that means is that we have somehow learned to be kind to people and to be the sort of person that we want to be able to be relied on by other people. Whereas, for instance, if we look at power, that's a value which is all about trying to seek authority over other people or to be able to influence the way that resources are used, let's say within our own organisation or within our family or whatever. So personality and values work together to make us what we are in effect. So I want to show you some research findings which address exactly this question. What is it that causes people's emotional intelligence? And this is research that Sachs undertook. We measured thousands of people in terms of their hexaco personality and their Schwartz values. And then we also got them to complete a measure of emotional intelligence, measuring the 3 characteristics of emotional intelligence that I mentioned earlier. And the findings look like this. So in the middle, you have this characteristic of emotional intelligence, recognizing emotions. So that is literally, can I tell the emotions of other people? Can I recognize them? And we assess the degree to which a person's values could contribute to this and their personality could contribute to this. And so what we see here is that based on thousands of people, we were able to predict a person's emotional intelligence in terms of recognizing emotions with about 48% accuracy, which is not inconsequential. Anytime that you can predict something in science, almost to the majority by virtue of measuring something else, well, you start to look at the new measure as old wine in new bottles, as the term is often used. And so people have taken the view, well, actually, emotional intelligence is largely personality. And if we go back to the model, you can see why people think this, because, about 50% is determined by personality and some by values, but you see largely personality. So the sort of people who can recognize other people's emotions, people with high social self-esteem, so that means people who are kind of comfortable in their own skin. Sentimentality, that's an interesting one because that's people who feel deeply about other people. Social boldness, so that's another extroversion characteristic, as is social self-esteem. So we start to get a picture that people who can recognize emotions in general might be extroverted. And so you see sociability is also an extroversion characteristic. So extroverts tend to be better at recognizing the emotions of other people than introverts. We also see modesty. What that means is that when people are not arrogant, so that's this green characteristic up here in honesty, humility, people who are not arrogant are better at recognizing the emotions of other people. And creative, altruistic people tend to be better at recognizing the emotions of other people. So it paints the picture of a person who is socially confident, and it paints the picture of somebody who is not arrogant, and it paints the picture of somebody who actually cares about and is broad-minded to the emotions of other people. The next characteristic is about optimism and self-regulation. And once more, the model is very similar. Thousands of people are measured in terms of their ability to self-regulate, and we measured their values and we measured their personality again. And what we discover here is that we can predict this with almost 60% accuracy. And so that is a very significant finding. I mean, that really is old wine in new bottles. And the things that cause people to be able to self-regulate their emotions, liveliness and social self-esteem. A person who is optimistic and cheerful is the sort of person who's much more likely to be able to self-regulate their emotions. By the way, we also know that optimists tend to be more successful in a range of different ways in their life in terms of making money. Even things like health outcomes tend to be better for optimists. Apart from that, altruism. So altruism pops up again, and that means I care about people and I want to help them. Creativity, so people who are sort of broad-minded and creative. Diligence and hard work. And that really comes to a kind of a measure of, or a proxy for resilience. Because we know that people who are resilient tend to be the sort of people who are hardworking, persistent, and quite often optimistic, cheerful types. And finally, we see sentimentality, which means, again, I'm plugged into other people's emotions. And hedonism is the first value that we see here. And hedonism really means I am the sort of person who likes to enjoy things. Isn't that interesting? So if you are the sort of person who likes to enjoy things, well, maybe you are a bit better at managing your own emotions and kind of picking yourself up if you get down. As the old saying goes, when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. And finally, we talk about personality and values predicting the capacity to use emotions for decision making. Now, this is interesting. We can't predict this quite as accurately, so we're predicting this with about 34% accuracy rather than 60 or 50 in the last 2 slides. And what we see here is that if you look at these characteristics, the characteristics that are being drawn on for the capacity to use emotions to make decisions are in fact often emotionality characteristics. Dependence. Dependence means I tend not to like to do things that other people might disapprove of. I'm dependent on other people for my emotional well-being. The next one is sentimentality, and sentimentality is the degree to which I plug into other people's emotions, and I kind of get hurt if their emotions are in bad shape. Anxiety. Well, we all know what anxiety is, and we also see that there are some personality characteristics of extroversion here. Social self-esteem, which means I feel comfortable in my own skin, and sociability, which is all about I want to be with people all the time. So you see that this does have an emotionality component to it, much more than the ability to self-regulate or to recognise other people's emotions. And you can imagine for certain jobs this could be a good thing. Say if you're a counsellor and you need to make decisions based on the emotional response of your client, well, that's a job which, in the words of various researchers, has a high degree of emotional labour. But you can imagine if you're, an auditor or an accountant or a surgeon or somebody like that, it may well be that using emotions to make decisions is not a good thing. And it may be that to appoint somebody into that job when they have the tendency to use emotions to make decisions, that could end up with a worse outcome. So you can measure these characteristics as you're hiring people. If you'd like to find out how to do so, and perhaps you'd like a free trial to experiment with our psych tests and see if they suit you, click on the link near this video or use the QR code that you can see now.